The story of Lisa the Painful follows Brad Armstrong's journey through a dilapidated land named Olathe as he tries to track down his only reason for being, his daughter, Buddy. The conclusion of the story culminates in a moving, emotional moment between Brad and Buddy, one that firmly ends Brad's story. However, there were some questions that were raised during his journey that were never really answered. In August of 2015, a DLC expansion named Lisa the Joyful was released in order to tie together all of those loose ends. The story of the expansion follows Buddy as she tries to move on from the events she experienced in Lisa the Painful, hoping to craft a life and legacy of her own. Along the way, she discovers more of the desires of the men around her and how their schemes have affected the world of Olathe. Here is a summary of the story of Lisa the Joyful. Warning: following this point, there will be no restraint on spoilers. If you haven't played the game yourself, I would heavily recommend taking the time to play it, along with Lisa the Painful, on your own first. This video will only be a faint shadow of the experience of truly playing the game, which is the best way to experience everything the story has to offer. In addition, some of the events of the game have been put in a particular order to help with the storytelling, but due to the freedom that the game allows you to play through some of these events, it may make for a slightly jarring viewing experience. But hopefully you still enjoy nonetheless. Now with all of that out of the way, let's get started. The game opens in darkness, with a smooth, summery song sounding out. But the music is interrupted by a beating. The darkness is lifted, and Brad, with a puddle of blood nearby, drags a large sack across the ground. He heads for his hut, where Buddy lies sleeping. He gently wakes her and tells her today's the day. He has a hard lesson to teach her, one that will prepare her in case anything should ever happen to him. Buddy is confused, asking what's in the bag Brad's brought to her. He opens the bag, revealing a restrained man covered in blood. Brad tells her the man's not dead yet, then begins to explain the harshness of the world to her, that people are going to try and hurt her. So she needs to be strong, decisive, and deadly. He pulls a knife and tells her that she needs to be able to become numb so she can take a life. As he begins explaining that this is the most important lesson he can teach her, understanding the difficulty of what he's asking her to do, the man wakes in a stupor. But his consciousness doesn't bother Brad, who continues his lesson at the dismay of the man, and Buddy herself, who covers her face, mortified. Brad presses Buddy to kill the man, who inversely begs Buddy to spare his life. The debate between the two is symbolizing the conflict she feels within herself. Then, Brad says something that ends her internal struggle, and she makes her decision. She stands, a cold, numb look on her face, and takes the blade from Brad. Then quiets the man's pleas by ripping out his throat. Brad, pleased with the success of his lesson, implies that there will be further lessons in killing by saying the next man won't be tied up. There's a return to darkness, and a conversation between two voices is heard. The first tells the second to remember their deal, that he belongs to him, and he doesn't want any of his friends getting in the way. The second can't make any promises, saying his methods don't work on all of them. But his mind seems to be dwelling on something else. He asks about Rando, if he'll be able to protect her. But the first answers in jest, mocking him and asking if he's weak. Unamused, the second dismisses the first, but not before warning that their partnership is over. And if he does anything to get in his way, he'll show him how weak he is. The scene then returns to the closing shot of the previous game. A mutated Brad inches towards a helpless Buddy. He lets out a guttural utterance of the only thing that remains of the mind that was there before, and crawls towards his victim. Hovering over the peacefully sleeping Buddy, he pleads for help. Buddy eventually wakes from her slumber and sees Brad's visage finally matches what she believes him to be on the inside, yet can't help but to feel pity for him. Suddenly, Buzzo appears, ordering her to stand back. He lassos Brad with a rope, preventing any further attacks from the mutant. He notices the joy pills next to Buddy, and with disappointment in his voice, chastises Buddy's curiosity. He then informs her he's taking Brad, which compels Buddy to question his motives. But as reserved as ever, Buzzo doesn't give her any answers. He merely tells her that she's free now and to not dwell on the past. Otherwise, she'll end up going insane. Buddy asks if he's going to hurt her, and Buzzo reveals that he's not, that he never wanted to, but warns of the harshness of the world, welcoming her to hell before vanishing. Left alone, Buddy begins wandering the wasteland in search of something, anything. She eventually comes across a group of men, their leader announcing her triumphant arrival. After relishing his opportune moment, he orders his men to grab her, but someone screams at them to stop. It's Rando, who survived his fight with Brad, although heavily injured. He limps up to Buddy and politely reiterates his demand. The leader of the men now mocks Rando for his battered appearance, and Rando mumbles to Buddy that he can't fight all these men, that they need to run. But the man, Bolo, the golden opportunist, isn't going to let them get away so easily. Suddenly, a large joy mutant jumps in and crushes a man under its feet, throwing everything into disarray. Rando recognizes the chance to flee and together with Buddy, escapes into a cave during the ensuing chaos. Buddy gets a chance to see the heavy wounds Brad inflicted upon Rando in their battle. And when Rando refuses to admonish Brad, Buddy turns from him in anger. Rando goes a step further and defends Brad, trying to explain that he just wanted to protect her, but Buddy is sick of hearing that same old story, so changes the subject to Sticky. The two reminisce about him for a moment, with Rando asking if he ever hurt Buddy, and she confirms he never touched her. In an effort to foster trust between them, Rando explains his motivations to her, that he's sick of the bloodshed that's consumed Olathe and wants peace. He believes that having Buddy repopulate the world will fix it, laying the heavy burden of the fate of Olathe on her shoulders, but promises to help lighten the load when he can. A loud, low moan rings out from outside the cave. Rando, recognizing they're still in danger, says they need to move, but since he's still weak, he'll need help from some friends. He asks Buddy to trust him, and depending on the choice of the player, Buddy either hops on to Rando's soldiers as a gesture of faith, or refuses to trust him, but promises to help, telling him she'll take him to his friends, but to stay behind her since he's injured. Either way, Rando gives Buddy a red skull mask to hide her identity, hoping it'll keep them safer. The duo set out, but don't get far until coming upon a group of men that just finished slaying a joy mutant. Upon seeing Rando and Buddy, they quickly begin a fight in an effort to get Buddy. Rando battles using the very familiar Armstrong style, confirming he must have been a student of Brad's at some point in the past. But he's not the only fighter that was tutored by Brad. Brandishing a blade, Buddy remembers the lessons Brad taught her, and ruthlessly cuts down the men where they stand. Her ability with a blade surprises Rando, and Buddy explains Brad taught her how to defend herself. This revelation seemingly annoys Rando, who mumbles Brad never taught him anything like that, but doesn't dwell on it long, saying they're almost to his friends. Passing through the bloodstained battlefield, they come to a large monolith with a list of 9 names painted in what seems to be blood. The 3 names at the bottom are crossed out, and upon closer inspection, are the names of the warlords Brad defeated or killed in his pursuit for Buddy. In awe of the imposing figure, Buddy asks Rando what it is. Rando explains that this list marks the border between eastern and western Olathe, and the people that control the land are in order from top to bottom. Buddy notices Rando's name is absent, and Rando explains that he and his army are left alone. Well, were left alone, but since Buddy's appearance... Buddy stares at the list, which names the most powerful men in the country, and a thought begins to formulate in her mind. But Rando snaps her out of her daydream. The duo keep moving, arriving to the foot of a mountain, which Rando says is the place. They enter a nearby cave, where they are attacked in the darkness, knocking them unconscious. Many days later, several men are arguing of whether to inform Rando of some event that happened. The decision is finally made to inform him, so one of the men gently wakes Rando, who is recuperating from his wounds. Wearing pink ponchos, the trio are the friends Rando was talking about earlier, and concerned for his health, ask about what happened to him. But Rando just wants to know where Buddy is. The men inform that they've got her, but they had to knock her out and tie her up due to her tenacity, which greatly upsets Rando. He explains to them that she's not a prisoner, she's the future, and scolds them for their actions. They then inform him of another incident. They had to kill Dale, one of their companions. While Buddy was tied up, he tried to... Distraught, Rando begins to crawl towards the door while his men beg him to stop, to rest, since he hasn't fully healed. But before he gets far, Rando passes out. He wakes up sometime later, alone. Still concerned with Buddy, he crawls from his room to the neighboring shack close by, where he finds Buddy standing over the corpses of 2 of the 3 men from before. Rando is astonished to see his men dead, and Buddy mentions that one of them managed to get away. Rando asks if they did anything to her, and Buddy tells him that they tied her up and locked her in this room, never mentioning anything else, but goes on about how all people want to do with her is lock her up, imprison her, and that she hates it. She makes a defiant vow to Rando. She refuses to be locked up. Rando lies still in silent contemplation, and Buddy walks to one of the men, asking if they were the friends he was talking about. Rando lies, telling her he doesn't know these men. He says they don't need to worry about his friends anymore. They just need to make sure that she's safe. Rando's still in bad shape, so Buddy tells them they're going to rest here until he's recovered, then mentions they'll get to work, as an ominously familiar red flash flares up within Buddy. Rando inquires about the work she mentioned, but Buddy just tells them to rest, and utters a warning that soon, everyone will know who they're dealing with. There's suddenly a cut to the blonde-haired boy that was in one of Brad's flashbacks, standing alone in the woods. As he wanders forth, he sees blood covers the ground, and a strange creaking sound begins echoing through the area. He eventually comes upon Lisa, who stands with her back towards him in between white flowers. She then turns into Buddy, who looks at the boy and asks him, "Ready to play?" Buzzo then wakes up from his dream. He's lying in a cave, his only companion being the mutated Brad, who is pulling at the stake he's tied to. His low moan being the only thing accompanying the creak of the rope. The scene returns to Buddy and Rando, who again asks Buddy what they're doing. Recalling the lessons she learned from Brad, she reveals to Rando that she wants her name at the top of the list. She wants everyone to fear her, so she can rule Olathe and set herself free. Rando is shocked at this turn of events and attempts to dissuade her from this path, saying she will only go through more pain or get herself killed. But Buddy explains that her body is numb. It's her heart and her head that hurt, and by doing this, she'll be free of the pain. Rando refuses to help her, saying it's too risky to place the fate of the entire human race on this endeavor, which prompts Buddy to menacingly reply that what he's saying is beginning to remind her of people that have been killed around her or by her. She gives him an ultimatum: either stand by and watch her, or help her. With a flash of red, she threatens that there's no way he's going to stop her. Rando tries to understand the transformation of Buddy that's occurred seemingly before his eyes, but Buddy pressures him to make a decision, so Rando reluctantly joins her. As the duo approach a campsite, Rando again asks Buddy if this is what she wants, and Buddy's response changes depending on if she chose to trust him earlier. She'll either remind Rando that when she trusted him, they were ambushed, so it's his turn to start trusting in her, or chide him for his concern, telling him he'll need to change his outlook if he wants to earn her trust. Either way, Rando decides to build their trust by telling her if she wants to rest, she can do it without worry, as he will watch over her. The two then set out to eliminate the first 3 warlords that hold dominion over this section of eastern Olathe. They begin with Lardy Hernandez, the 4th Hernandez brother, and the main trafficker of supplies throughout eastern Olathe, whom they find in the back of one of his supply trucks. He recognizes Rando and fires off questions to him, never really acknowledging Buddy. She cuts in and demands he tell her his name, which causes an argument to rage between the two, until Rando ends it by confirming his identity, prompting Buddy to charge forward and kill Lardy there in his truck. The two return to the list where they cross his name out and set out to continue Buddy's venture. As they pass the campsite, Rando tells Buddy to rest since she looks tired. At first combative, Buddy eventually concedes and warns Rando to not fall asleep before curling up and drifting off to sleep. That night, Rando again tries to dissuade Buddy, offering to build a home somewhere, a place that she could play all day away from the bloodshed of Olathe. He grows nostalgic and fondly reminisces about how kids used to play all day before the Flash, about the creeks and rivers of Olathe. He comments the way she's living isn't right. It's not normal. Buddy's reply is simple. She reminds him she was born into this Olathe, not the one from his memories. For her, all of this, the bloodshed, the cruelty, the utter desperation, it's all normal. So he needs to leave her alone, so that she can get plenty of rest, so tomorrow she can go out and play. Rando hangs his head, and Buddy drifts back to sleep. The next day, the two come to a village bordered by two white masks on sticks, and Rando asks Buddy to wait a moment. He explains the uniqueness of Mr. Beautiful's village. All of its residents are pacifists, but Buddy doesn't know what that means, so Rando has to explain that it means they don't fight. He begs her to spare the residents, to only kill Mr. Beautiful since he's who she's here for. The others don't want to fight. Buddy mulls over whether to kill the townsfolk as she travels through the village, but comes to find she isn't the only thing threatening their existence. One of the residents has mutated due to his ingestion of joy and has been slaughtering his helpless neighbors. Together with Rando, she kills the mutant, freeing the village of its terror, and continues finding Mr. Beautiful shortly after. He fires off multiple questions to Rando, who can only apologize to him. Buddy approaches and asks if he's Mr. Beautiful. After he confirms, Buddy charges the man, who at first stays true to his nature, but when his mask breaks, he breaks his vow and begins fighting back, but eventually succumbs to Rando and Buddy, asking Rando why he's doing this with his dying words. The duo return to the list, where they cross off Mr. Beautiful's name. They decide to rest at the campsite again. This time, Buddy asks if Rando wants to rest, but he tells her he's fine, so she goes to sleep, unconcerned with her slaughter of lovers of peace. The only thing that disturbs her is Rando, who wakes her later that night saying he's got something important to tell her. He tells her his real name, Dustin Armstrong. He used to go by Dusty for short. He was the young, meek boy seen in one of Brad's flashbacks, the one he took in and taught to fight for free, and the one whose face was mutilated in an attack by someone wielding a saw. Buddy recognizes Armstrong as Brad's last name, and Rando confirms he was Brad's adopted son. Buddy doesn't know what that means and just wants to know if Brad was his dad. Rando says he likes to think so, and that he respected him very much, even up to the end. He then finally remembers a quirk of Brad's. He didn't like to be called Dad. Buddy remembers that same thing, and the two share a warm silence for a moment as they contemplate the bond that ties them together. Rando breaks the silence, saying aloud the thought they're thinking in their head, then tries to use that bond to attempt to convince Buddy to give up her crusade. But Buddy ends the conversation and goes back to sleep. Only one warlord remains in the area, so the next morning, Rando and Buddy enter the cave system that Vega Van Damme calls home. Interestingly, they have to fight their way through two joy mutants that have ravaged the area, and behind the second, find a doorway that's boarded up, preventing the monsters from proceeding further. They break down the barrier and make their way through Van Damme's area, where they find one of his men is worried about their appearance, terrified that the monsters will follow in after them. When they encounter Vega Van Damme himself, he also mentions the monsters, implying he and his men were taking shelter from the Joy Mutants. After a flashy introduction, Buddy and Rando kill the warlord. They return to the list, where they find the monolith was recently the stage of a brutal battle. The ground is covered with the remnants of those that fell in the fighting, and among the dismembered corpses are the remains of even more Joy mutants. Following the trail of bodies, the two arrive at their familiar campsite and find Bob, one of the men that served Rando, dead, yet partially mutated, implying he fell to the temptation of Joy and died in the recent battle. Rando begins to lament his death, but when Buddy recognizes him as one of the kidnappers and asks how he knows his name, Rando has to again lie to Buddy, this time unconvincingly saying he just knows everyone around here. Buddy seems to buy it and welcomes Bob's departure. She nonchalantly starts to get ready to rest, which sets something off in Rando. He confronts her again, saying she can't keep going down this path. She can't keep killing people, because she alone has the power to give humanity a future, and it needs to be one of peace. Buddy agrees with Rando on one point. She does have power, but rejects the world he once built, saying she's never going to let someone control her again. She's going to control her own future and build her own world. Distraught, Rando exclaims that not all of these men deserve to die, but Buddy justifies their slaughter by explaining that if she didn't stick up for herself, then she would have been beaten and raped several times by now, and she's only showing these men the same courtesy they would have shown her. When Rando tries to protest yet again, Buddy grows angry and expounds of her one-of-a-kind nature, that he needs her, so he has no choice but to fight with her if he wants peace, or he can just end up like that piece of shit Brad. Silence hangs between the two. Rando's soft voice finally breaks it. Seemingly giving up his own will, he concedes to Buddy's plan and tells her to get some rest so they can get her to the top of the list. Satisfied, Buddy curls up and has a long, uninterrupted sleep. She wakes in the morning to find that her fraternal guardian is nowhere to be found. At odds with Buddy's vision of the world, Rando chose to abandon her. Buddy's wrath and hubris has pushed away the only one close to her, leaving her to complete her daunting task alone. It's a position drastically similar to the one Brad found himself in just before facing Rando's army. And frighteningly, just like her father, an incredibly intense feeling within Buddy wells up and pushes her to go on to achieve her innermost desire.